Okay, good evening, Supernatural Folklore. Welcome to week 5 of our course. I have a little bit of a different background tonight. I'm chilling on the couch, giving my lecture. So, the first thing I want to mention is um, I had several people that did turn in a research paper proposal. Now, I want you to make a good grade on your research paper. I want to enjoy reading your research paper. So I do this process so that you have an opportunity to give me exactly what I'm asking for on the research paper. So if you haven't turned in your research paper proposal, please let me know what you're thinking about doing so that I can give you an idea of how you need to narrow that topic down, um, give you an idea of whether or not the significance that you're talking about is actually significant. Um, So please, please, please give me a research paper proposal. I am getting the feedback back to you guys that gave me a research paper proposal. So please look at the feedback on that. Sorry, guys, I have been coughing really bad this weekend. So I'm probably going to cough. Just excuse me. Um, this week we start talking about ghosts. And we have two readings. One is Thomas's The Usefulness of Ghost Stories. So we're going to start with that one. Um, Thomas asserts that ghost stories communicate culturally or personally significant information to their audiences, and she says that on 25. Um, People will decide how much they want to believe or not believe. Folklorists simply treat them seriously and analyze this. And in some of the comments last week, there were a lot of people kind of expressing some disbelief about Ouija boards, which is fine. But generally, we just sort of treat people like they're telling the truth. And it doesn't necessarily matter if we believe them. It matters more that they believe it. Um, so we don't disprove that they're telling the truth. We just treat them like they are and work with what we got. So what Thomas is doing here is applying functionalism to her topic. And on page 26, she says that ghost stories are a useful way to come in an understanding of the world we inhabit. And they help us to look more closely and analytically at culture, the environment, and the personal. So again, remember how I said that Bascom's functions could tell us things about a culture? Thomas is saying that the same thing is true of ghost stories here. So she reveals a ghost story on page 27 and 28 of the article, and she says that, as Goldstein pointed out a couple weeks ago, rational explanations are a part of the conversation. Thomas also asserts that we try to compartmentalize these stories, and some of the compartments that we use are film and literature in the hope that they will give us some kind of meaning. Now, we've all, or many of us, have watched ghost stories on film. Some of those are scary, those fall into the horror genre. Others of them fall into other genres like comedy or drama. But I have a feeling that most of us have seen or heard a ghost story. Um, Ghost stories show up all the time in literature. Edgar Allan Poe wrote lots of them. M.R. James wrote lots of them. Stephen King writes lots of them. So there are lots of writers of ghost stories. Pick your favorite. Um, she says that ghost stories are still, the fact that ghost stories are still being told indicates that everyday life can be, quote, difficult, elusive, indefinite, and sometimes impossible. The ghost story reminds us how much is awfully and deliciously indeterminate in life. So, a lot of times, what she seems to be pointing out is that ghost stories can really kind of point out the anxieties that we have about the world that we live in. She suggests two questions to determine the cultural significance of a story. One of those is about cultural values. What cultures does the story reflect? What cultural values or truths, historical or contemporary, can be discerned in the narrative? Does it reveal or reinforce cultural values? So those are questions that we want to ask ourselves about the story. And then it can also be it reveals something about cultural stresses and conflicts. How does the story present issues about which there are fear, stress, or conflict in the culture? Um, how are these issues handled in the narrative? And what views of trauma, death, and the body emerge from the story? So we can apply this to many different kinds of ghost stories. Um, I'm going to talk about it just really quickly in the context of one of Stephen King's ghost stories, which is a novel called Bag of Bones, in which um, the protagonist is an author, and his wife dies suddenly of an aneurysm, and he finds out after her death that she was pregnant. And after her death, he experiences really severe writer's block, and so he goes to their vacation cabin, and then he starts having this kind of ghostly. He has these ghostly encounters with his wife, but he also has these kind of visions and premonitions of another local legend, which was a blues singer in the area whose daughter was murdered. So, if we look at that story and we look at issues about which he's expressing fear, stress, or conflict, um, certainly I think you can look at there is a great deal of fear attached often to losing one's spouse, particularly unexpectedly. There are a lot of things that come from that. It has an impact on us physically, it has an impact on us emotionally, and it certainly has an impact on us financially. In this case, um, this author isn't able to work, like he's not able to write. And so, you know, I think there's the feeling there that there's certainly something um, very stressful and a fear of having your life impacted by such a major event. Um, he can't he has these ghostly encounters with his wife, and she actually ends up saving his life. But um, when they first start, he's very comforted by that. So there's also, I think, it's revealing the idea that even in death, we take comfort from those relationships in our life, which were affirming to us. So you can look at any ghost story in this way and kind of look for what issues are they talking about with fear, stress, or conflict. Also, views about trauma. Is the ghost there because something traumatic happened and they can't leave? Um, you know, some cultures view death as being a very freeing and liberating experience, while other cultures view it as a very scary experience. And so I think when we analyze ghost stories, we can kind of see what kinds of views of trauma and death in the body appear based on the story. Excuse me. Through this, she asserts that ghostly stories about a bathroom may be a way of a culture dealing with the unpleasant happenings that occur there, the ambivalence about our own bodies and their functions, because usually when we're in the bathroom, we're half naked or completely naked, um, our vulnerability, also, we're naked. No, nobody wants to be caught in the bathroom. And the desire to, quote, flush away things we don't like or understand and our inability to do anything about those. Um, she also mentions in this liminal spaces and liminality. I think we've talked about liminality before and the fact that it's places that are in between. And there can be liminal spaces, liminal phases, items that represent liminality, and those are all classified as in between in some way. For example, there are lots of ghostly encounters on stairs. Stairs are a liminal space in a house. They're not up on the second floor, but they're not down on the first floor either. They're somewhere in between. And so anything that's in between like that is just fraught with peril. So there are usually lots of stories and superstitions about those kinds of spaces. usually designed to protect us and get us out of whatever the in between is. Um, Thomas also suggests two questions to determine an environmental analysis of a story. She says to look at the aspects of the environment that are represented. What does the story reveal about the landscape in which it takes place? What physical realities does the account describe? Of what natural conditions, such as atmospheric, might the narrative make us aware? Does the story describe unusual or little known natural phenomena? Things like blizzards, things like thunderstorms. It was a dark and stormy night, right? So all of those little atmospheric, physical locations. Many times, a ghost story will include someone feeling cold. A ghost story may include someone feeling like the air is oppressive, like they can't breathe. Um, and so, what are those things telling us about the environment in which the area is? She also says that we can look at attitudes toward the environment. How does the story describe the landscape in which the events take place? How tied to the landscape are the events? Do any details in the narrative indicate attitudes toward nature and the environment? And does the story change how those who tell and hear it see the physical setting of the story? So, if the story takes place in a graveyard and someone tells you the story, then you may be afraid to go to that graveyard. Or if it is in a house, you may be afraid to go to that house or a park. It may affect your feeling about that place. There are tons of stories told about Gettysburg, um, which is a battlefield in Pennsylvania. It was the site of one of the deadliest battles in the Civil War. So there are lots of ghost stories told about Gettysburg. That may affect how you feel when you go there. Now, I think it's a lovely landscape wise, and how it looks. I think it's lovely. I think the monuments there are lovely. But there are many people who are fearful or saddened or um, affected by um, stories that they've heard about ghostly happenings at Gettysburg. Um, Thomas, she says that people can become more attached to a place when we know more about its history, and that ghost stories can allow that to happen. They can also draw our attention to the landscape, and they can make us aware of things that happen in that place that don't happen anywhere else. Um, she also suggests that ghost stories can tell us about the personal and individual lives of people. So they can tell us about transforming individual thought. In what specific ways does the story work to transform the thinking of the listener or teller? Why? How is this change made manifest? Is the experiential um, for is the experiential a basis for the response to the numinous? Okay, so numinous means something that has a strong religious or spiritual quality, which indicates or suggests the presence of a deity. That may describe something like Stonehenge. It may describe any place where you feel like a religious or a spiritual connection. That would be described as numinous. And that word comes up in this article a few times. Um, she also says that these types of ghost stories can transform individual behaviors. So, what specific parts of the narrative function to transform behavior? What does the action of the story call forth? What is the impact of these actions, and how lasting is the transformation wrought by the numinous? Right? Does it have a lifelong impact on you, or does it last for a couple weeks? Um, Here it is also helpful to recall some of the things that we have discussed on ostension. Ostension is acting out some part of a legend or supernatural narrative. So, ostension is often seen in um, directions for how to get something to happen. For example, I shared with you guys the story about Bloody Mary that was told to me um, by a girl, right? And she gave a whole litany of things that you had to do to get Bloody Mary to appear. You had to go into the bathroom, you had to turn out the lights, you had to light a candle, the candle had to be white, you had to say Bloody Mary 13 times, right? If you do that, that is ostension. You're acting out that part of the story. It may also be ostension if you go to a place and you have heard a story about someone using a Ouija board there and something happened, and so you take a Ouija board there and use it. So, those types of things, when you're acting out part of a ritual or a story or whatever, that's what we call ostension. All right. She reminds us that there are both positive and negative ways that stories can affect us personally. Sometimes they bring us closer together, and sometimes these stories traumatize us. And she discusses ways to reduce fear, which she says is a common but understudied folk belief system. So people have ways that they communicate about trying not to be afraid. Um, and we don't look alike. Like, what things do you do to keep from that you believe keep you from being afraid? So, one of those things is companionship. You have somebody with you, right? It's not nearly as scary when you have a friend. Um, or it's not nearly as scary in the middle of the night if mom comes or dad comes to get the monster under the bed. Um, Having a magical action or substance. This might be like a lucky penny. This might be a having a cross around your neck to ward off vampires or to bring you good luck or to, you know, uh, having a ghost spray or smudging your house. I think I talked a little bit about smudging on the discussion board last week, or using sage on your house. That would be a magical action or substance. Isolation and neutralization or distraction, right? You hear something funny in the apartment, so you leave the apartment and you go get coffee and you stay out until very late, and then when you come back, everything's fine, right? That would be isolation and neutralization or distraction. Um, and then there are also things like eradication and displacement. This would be like something like blessing your house. This might be something like calling a priest to do an exorcism, right? Some way to eradicate and displace whatever entity is causing you fear. And she says that recontextualizing the stories into stories about culture, environment, or personal transformation can also help to alleviate fear. If something happens and you are able to discuss that in the context of what it meant to you personally, then sometimes you're able to recontextualize it and it's not as scary as it was when it happened. Um, So she gives us a lot of questions that we can ask in analyzing ghost stories, and I think that those are pretty valid questions to ask when we're analyzing lots of kinds of legends, because really and truthfully, stories all do mostly about the same thing. The only thing is that ghost stories are dealing particularly usually with things that we fear. And they really kind of reveal our cultural anxieties, which is why we have, stories about, um, the ghosts of children returning. I think every parent's deepest fear is the loss of their child. And so it may be comforting for them to think about um, the ghost of a child returning to them or something of that nature. Um, we have mothers that reappear to children. We have, um, you know, um, lots of ways that we can look at stories and kind of recontextualize them to make ourselves less afraid. Um, and I was trying to think of a good example of that, and I don't really have one at this moment. So I will think of one though. Sorry, guys. I also want to talk about Williams' article, The Liveness of Ghosts, Haunting and Reality Television. Now, I did post a link to an episode of Ghost Hunters. That particular episode of Ghost Hunters, sorry, is about Western. And I'm also going to post a link to our Spirits on the Hill page that talks about different ghost stories on campus. Now, a lot of times this time of year, sometimes they give ghost tours on campus, and that's also called Spirits on the Hill, and they'll take you around campus and talk about ghosts and things like that. Um, if you watch the Ghost Hunters episode, I would really like for you to compare what they talk about on that episode with what is on the website, and kind of see what differences there are. So Williams points out that the show of contacting and experiencing supernatural beings and phenomena and gathering evidence has been happening since the late 1800s, which we talked about that last week. It has simply been updated for our current time. She walks us through what reality television is and how that medium in the terms of media, not medium in the terms of seance, is used to communicate certain information to the audience. Audiences and entertainers have constructed what reality television consists of. So, what is it? Well, first of all, reality television is supposed to be happening in real time or happening live. So, people are experiencing it all together, which gives it a temporal significance, right? In this way, the dead, who are necessarily past tense, right? Dead, gone, past, have to become more present. And the show has to focus on the trauma and explosiveness of the present that are a result of the death, right? Reality television doesn't deal with what's past. It deals with what's happening right now. So what are the ways in which reality television makes the death of the person present? Like, they talk about trauma, they talk about what things that the ghost is doing, those kinds of things. Um, they also, reality television uses documentary techniques, which lead credibility to the content, but there are still elements that are used to emphasize the drama and are manipulated. For example, the use of devices or point of view techniques, right? Camera angles, lighting. There are all kinds of things that reality television in general, and ghost hunting reality television in particular, uses to heighten the drama. All right. This is supposed to lend proof of the situation because documentary is an appeal to sensory evidence, right? Seeing is believing. Even though most viewers these days are pretty savvy about the processes that go into reality television, I still hear students say all the time, if I saw a video of it, I might believe it, right? But then we know that video is pretty easily manipulated, and in that way, we don't even believe what we see anymore. Um, And the continued success of the show relies on the ambiguity of the outcome, right? If ghost hunters had absolute and definitive proof of a ghost, there wouldn't be any need to have another ghost hunter show, right? They'd no longer be trying to prove that ghosts exist. So there has to be some kind of ambiguity about whether or not they exist at the end of every show. She also points out, Williams also points out that the fear of the participants is a way to suggest the presence that we can't feel through the television. All right. So they have to ask each other, did you feel that? Did you hear that? Did you see that? Because they know that we as viewers might not hear that. We're definitely not going to feel that. So they have to make that sensory evidence obvious to us. So she says that in this way, fear becomes the evidence of the uncanny traces of history in the present, encouraging an effective historical consciousness, right? She also says that videos were not about what should be known about the past, but what we should feel about the past. So, for example, it's not about a stagehand falling from the roof of Van Meter Auditorium onto the stage. It's about how we should feel about that. This is an unfortunate accident. This person was robbed of life, and now they are haunting the auditorium. So it's not about what actually happened in the past as much as it is how we're supposed to feel about the past. Um, so, like I said, I did post a link to the Ghost Hunters episode. If you can't watch it, please let me know. Also, I'm going to post the link to Ghost Stories on the Hill. And I want you to think about how that squares or not with what's discussed on the show. If you can't watch Ghost Hunters, the discussion board for this week, any ghost hunting reality television show will suffice here, because they all do largely the same thing. Um, so we'll take a look at the ways. So with this episode, I want you to look at how William's observations are valid for the show, and maybe they're not in some areas. Um, but think about the things like the camera angles, what they're saying, and how they're portraying information, and see if it squares with what Williams had to say about reality television. Um, Remember that you have a discussion board this week. Also, please remember to go over and check out that feedback on your um, research paper proposals. If you did not turn in a research paper proposal to me, please drop me a quick email. Like I said, we have several assignments that lead up to the research paper. I know, when professors would do this to me when I was in college, I really hated them for it. Right up until the paper was due. And then when the paper was due, it was actually just really, really easy to write it because I'd already done all the things that I needed to do that I probably would have procrastinated on until the last minute. So please make sure that you submit some kind of research paper topic to me. It will make your life easier in the long run. Also, I have a few people who are missing discussion boards consistently. We're in week 5. Typically, there are 5 or 6 freebies in the semester, but I hate to see you spend all of those right here at the beginning, especially when we have interesting things like Halloween and Thanksgiving break and fall break coming up, and you may not want to post a discussion board those weeks. I don't want to see you penalized for missing and not getting all 10 of your boards. Also, the presentation at the Kentucky Museum with David Puglia was phenomenal, on monsters, and his book is very good. Any of you guys that want to look at monsters for your research paper might be a good source for you. I did have a couple students there. Hi. And it was great to see you guys. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as I did. I had a wonderful time. So, if you have any questions, comments, snide remarks, please let me know. I am going to post the questions and comments board. One of your classmates is asking about an in-person study group, so anybody who's interested in that needs to go to that questions and comments discussion board and get with them about a time, for those meetings. Let me know how I can help you this week, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.